You wake up to the muffled hum of voices, the flickering light of a fire casting shadows against the tent walls. Outside, soldiers laugh, drink, and sharpen their swords. The year is the 13th century, and you are a woman who has found herself in the dust and smoke of a medieval military camp. The path here was not one of choice, but of circumstance. Poverty, abandonment, hunger, or the cruel turns of fate that left no other way. Your story, though uniquely yours, is part of a far older tale, one that stretches back thousands of years, woven into the fabric of human civilization. Tonight, we will walk through that history together, slowly, gently, as if wandering down an ancient road lit by lanterns, discovering how prostitution has existed in almost every age and every place. Close your eyes and let us step gently into the warmth of the ancient world. The air is heavy with incense, and the glow of torches flickers against stone walls. You find yourself walking through the narrow streets of Uruk, one of the first great cities of Mesopotamia, nearly 5,000 years ago. The dust of the earth clings to your feet, and the hum of life surrounds you. Merchants shouting, donkeys braying, children weaving between stalls. But beyond the market lies a temple, its walls carved with symbols of gods and goddesses, its stairway leading upward toward the heavens. And it is here, within the sacred precincts, that prostitution as we know it finds one of its earliest forms. In this time, sexuality was not always bound by shame. In Mesopotamian belief, intimacy was tied to fertility, the cycles of crops and harvest, to the eternal dance between life and death. Women who served the goddess Ishtar, deity of love, duty, and war, were thought to embody her divine presence. Some ancient texts suggest that rituals took place where priestesses welcomed strangers as part of a sacred union between mortals and the divine. This was not seen as corruption or sin. It was holiness itself, a way to ensure fertility of the land, the people, and the future. But outside the temples, prostitution also existed in a humbler, harsher form. In the crowded cities along the Tigris and Euphrates, where famine might strike and families could fall into ruin, a woman might turn into selling her body for a loaf of bread, a clay jug of beer, or the safety of shelter for a single night. Poverty has always been one of the compelling forces behind this trend. And in Mesopotamia, the clay tablets record laws that acknowledge, regulate, and sometimes even protect those who practiced it. The Code of Hammurabi, written around 1750 BCE, includes provisions about prostitutes, granting them certain rights, but also setting them apart as a distinct class in society. Travel westward in your mind, across the sea, to the city-states of Greece. The sun is brighter here, the air filled with the salt of the Aegean. You walk through Athens, where philosophy and democracy are beginning to bloom. And yet, outside the grandeur of ideas and politics, another trade thrives. In the bustling port of Proyas, brothels stand openly, often state-owned, their doors welcoming sailors returning from long voyages. Here, prostitution is recognized as part of daily life, an institution woven into the city itself. Yet Greece also gives us the figure of the hetaira, a woman who lived outside the ordinary rules of wife and mother. Hetairai were courtesans, but more than that, they were educated, eloquent, and independent. They could attend symposia, those drinking parties for philosophers, poets, and statesmen, gathered to debate and dream. A Hindera might discuss politics with Pericles, recite poetry alongside Socrates, or simply charm her companions with wit and intelligence. They stood apart from wives, who were expected to remain silent, invisible in the household. In a society that restricted women's voices, the hetairai carved out a space of influence, though their power always remained precarious. Not all prostitutes in Greece lived such lives of refinement. Many were slaves, forced into the trade by owners who profited from their bodies. Others were foreigners, outsiders without family ties or protection. The contrast between the esteemed thetra and the enslaved prostitute reveals the vast gulf of experience within the same profession, at once glamorous and degrading, empowering and enslaving. Now we drift further still, to the beating heart of empire, Rome. The streets are crowded, loud with the clash of carts over cobblestones. Markets spill into the open squares, and in every alley, you hear the laughter and whispers of the world's oldest train. Prostitution in Rome was everywhere. In taverns, in brothels marked with painted signs, even in the shadow of temples. Roman law tolerated it, but also branded prostitutes as infamous, dishonorable, stripped of respect in society. They were allowed to work, but never to escape the stigma attached. Step inside a Roman brothel, and you find small cubicles, walls decorated with frescoes, depicting the acts within. These were not places of luxury, but of business, functional, transactional. Yet, at the same time, Rome had its own courtesans, women who mingled with senators and emperors, who lived in villas and wore fine clothes. Just as in Greece, there was a spectrum, from the lowly streetwalker to the companion of the powerful. What drove women into prostitution in these ancient times? Hunger most often, displacement, widowhood, slavery. Sometimes choice played a role, a chance for a woman to carve out independence in a world that otherwise offered little. But always, the reasons were compelling, rooted in the harshness of survival. To sell one's body was not a mark, of moral failure. It was an act of endurance, a means of living another day when all else was lost. And so, across Mesopotamia, Greece and Rome, prostitution took many shapes. Sacred ritual, refined companionship, raw survival. It was a mirror of each society, reflecting their values, hypocrisies, and needs. As you drift now, imagine the torchlight dimming, the voices fading. The ancient world lies behind us, yet its stories still echo in the present. For the trade, born in temples and alleys, has never truly vanished. It has only changed its form. The night is cool, and the narrow stone streets are quiet, except for the muffled laughter drifting from a wooden doorway ahead. Torches flicker along the walls, casting shadows that dance like restless spirits. As you walk closer, the laughter becomes clearer, mingled with a strum of the lute and the clink of clay mugs. The smell of spiced wine, tallow candles, and damp earth fills the air. You are standing before a medieval brothel, a place both feared and sought after, condemned and yet strangely tolerated. Step inside, and you find a room lit by wavering candles. The floor is uneven, the tables raffoon, but the warmth of bodies and the hum of voices wrap around you like a blanket. Women move gracefully among the patrons, not adorned in silks or jewels, but in plain gowns, sometimes marked by yellow veils or striped patterns to identify them as prostitutes by law. Some laugh with customers, others pour ale, and still others play music to soften the room's rough edges. This world is not glamorous. It is survival. Many of these women were driven here by poverty, by abandonment, or by the sudden loss of a husband. Others were orphans or strangers in a new city, with no trade to fall back on. Prostitution, for them, was not the first choice, but often the only one available in a time when women's opportunities were painfully limited. Hunger pushed them through the doorway. Hunger kept them here. And yet, despite the Church's constant thunder of condemnation, prostitution in medieval Europe was woven into the very fabric of society. Priests and preachers declared it sinful, warning that those who visited such places risked their souls. But theologians, like Saint Augustine, admitted, reluctantly, that prostitution served as a safety valve. Without it, he warned, men might commit worse sins, rape, adultery, or even violence. Better, in the eyes of some, to confine lust to the brothel than to let it spill uncontrolled into society. So Cynthius made compromises. Many authorities regulated brothels, designating entire streets or districts for the trade. In places like Toulouse, Paris, and Barcelona, prostitution was taxed. The money flowing into the city coffers, or even, ironically, into the pockets of church officials. In London, the infamous Tuas of Southwark operated along the Thames. These brothels fell under the jurisdiction of the Bishop of Winchester, and the women who worked there were mockingly called Winchester geese. The bishop collected rent and fees, enriching the church even as sermons rallied against the very trade from which it profited. Inside such houses, the roles of the women extended far beyond sex. They were entertainers, listeners, sometimes even healers of broken spirits. A weary soldier might come, not only seeking flesh but companionship after months of war. A merchant might desire not only pleasure, but a friendly ear after weeks on the road. For apprentices, these visits were almost a rite of passage, an initiation into adulthood, whispered about among peers. Yet this shadow economy grew at a cost. Disease often spread quickly within brothels, and women bore the brunt of both social stigma and physical danger. Regulations sometimes tried to protect them. Curfews, inspections, or requirements for special clothing, but these rules also reinforced their status as outsiders, marked and separated from respectable society. To walk through the streets in a yellow veil was to live under a label that could never be fully shed. Still, bonds of sisterhood formed within this world. Women shared advice, whispered warnings about violent customers, and comforted each other through illness or despair. Some even managed to rise above their station, becoming courtesans or mistresses to powerful men, wielding influence and gathering wealth, though their hold on such privilege was always fragile. And always, the church loomed in the background. Monks wrote sermons condemning prostitutes, yet monasteries sometimes offered shelter to repentant women. Cathedrals rose into the sky, funded in part by the taxes drawn from brothels below. It was a paradox that defined medieval life: sin and sanctity intertwined, shadow and light inseparable. Imagine again the medieval street at night. The torches gutter, the laughter continues, and a lute plays softly in the distance. Step through the doorway of the brothel, and you see not only transactions of coin, but transactions of survival. You see lives lived at the edge of morality, tolerated yet despised, hidden yet necessary. This is the story of brothers and the church in medieval Europe, a story of contradiction and endurance, where human resilience glowed quietly against the backdrop of judgment. A story that, though often ignored, shaped the very rhythm of medieval towns and cities. The bells of Venice echo across the canals, their sound mingling with the lapping of water against gondolas. You are drifting through the city at dusk, past palaces with gilded balconies and windows glowing with candlelight. The air carries the fragrance of rosewater and incense, and above the chatter of merchants and travelers, you hear music, lutes and violins, voices raised in songs that celebrate love, wit, and beauty. This is the Renaissance, the rebirth of art and ideas, and here, the figure of the courtesan steps out of the shadows of mere survival into a place of influence and allure. Step into the chamber of a celebrated Venetian courtesan. The room is hung with rich tapestries. illuminated by flickering lamps that catch on polished mirrors and gilded frames. Books lie scattered on the table. Poetry, philosophy, even letters in Latin or Greek. Unlike her medieval sisters, who were often forced into narrow lives of service, the courtesan of the Renaissance is cultivated, educated, and skilled in conversation. She is not simply a body for hire. She is a companion for the mind, as well as the senses. Patrons sought courtesans, not only for intimacy, but for refinement. They were expected to be witty, to discuss politics, to recite poetry, to play instruments, and to hold their own in debates with the most learned men of the age. In cities like Venice, Florence, and later Paris, courtesans were as much cultural icons as they were lovers. They inspired poets, influenced diplomats, and sometimes shaped the reputation of entire courts. Their salons became gathering places where art and politics mingled in the glow of candlelight. But their status was always precarious. A courtesan could rise to fame, enjoying jewels, villas, and the favor of noble patrons, only to fall into poverty when beauty fades, fortune shifted, or scandal struck. Beneath the glittering surface lay the same harsh realities: dependence on men's wealth, vulnerability to disease, and the inescapable stigma of selling one's body, however refined the setting. The Renaissance courtesan embodied contradiction. She was admired for her wit and charm, yet condemned as immoral. She moved among the powerful, yet was never fully accepted by polite society. She was educated and eloquent, yet her learning was often dismissed as dangerous or unseemly for a woman. And yet, in her presence, one could glimpse a strange kind of freedom. For many women of the Renaissance, life meant obedience to father, to husband, to church. But for the courtesan, there was a measure of independence, however fragile: the ability to choose patrons, to earn wealth, to live beyond the domestic cage. As Europe moved into the Enlightenment, the courtesan's shadow lengthened. In Paris, salons hosted by witty women blurred the lines between respectable hostesses and worldly companions. Knowledge and sensuality intertwined as philosophers, writers, and artists sought both intellectual and physical stimulation in the same rooms. Courtesans became muses to men who dreamed of liberty and reason, their beauty immortalized in paintings, and their words echoed in memoirs. And yet, the same Enlightenment thinkers who praised freedom and equality often excluded women from their visions. For all her learning and influence, the courtesan remained outside the realm of true acceptance. She was admired, even envied, but never fully embraced. She was a shadow figure, essential to the glittering life of the Renaissance and Enlightenment, yet destined to live at its margins. Imagine yourself now in one of these salons. The candles are low, the wine rich, the laughter sparkling. Philosophers debate across the room, while a courtesan leans close, whispering sharp observations that cut deeper than any essay. In her words lies both wisdom and warning, both allure and tragedy. She is the courtesan, the muse, the shadow, an unforgettable presence in the grand dance of history. As you drift towards sleep, remember her, adorned in silks, crowned in wit, and carrying the weight of survival in a world that celebrated her and scorned her in the same breath. This is the story of the Renaissance and Enlightenment courtesan, the shadow who walked beside power, leaving a trail of mystery and desire across the centuries. The lanterns are glowing softly, their paper shades painted with flowers and flowing calligraphy. You are walking through a narrow street in Kyoto in the early evening. The air smells of pine smoke and sweet rice wine, and snow drifts slightly across the tiled roofs. From behind sliding doors comes the faint sound of shamisen strings, plucked in elegant rhythm. The world is hushed but alive. This is not the clamor of a European brothel. It is the carefully cultivated world of the Japanese geisha. Step inside, and you find yourself in a tatami room where light flickers on painted screens. The geisha enters, not as a prostitute in the Western sense, but as an artist. Her face is painted in porcelain white, her lips a perfect crimson bloom. Her kimono shimmers with layers of silk, each pattern chosen with care. She bows with grace, and when she speaks, her voice is melodic, practiced to soothe, to intrigue, to weave conversation into art. Kageisha was never meant to be defined by sex alone. She was an entertainer, skilled in music, poetry, dance, calligraphy, and the art of conversation. Men came to her for companionship, refinement, and beauty in its broadest sense. Yet, in the outside world, her image was often misunderstood. To many Western travelers, the geisha became synonymous with prostitution, though the reality was more complex. Some geisha did form intimate relationships with patrons, but many lived lives focused on performance and artistry. Beyond Japan, Asia carried its own rich traditions of sex work and companionship. In China, they were the courtesans of the Tang and Ming dynasties who performed poetry and music for scholars and officials. These women, often called yiji, occupied a world that combined sensuality with intellectual companionship. A man might spend an evening with a courtesan not only in her bed, but in her study, reciting verses or debating philosophy. Like the Hyderae in Greece, with the courtesans of Venice, they balance the edge between respect and stigma, artistry and commerce. In India, another tradition unfolded within the sacred halls of temples. The Devadasis were women dedicated to the service of gods, dancing and singing in devotion. Their rituals, at times, included intimate relations with patrons who supported the temple's life. Originally honored as sacred servants, Devadasis were protectors of culture guardians of music and dance. But as centuries passed, the system shifted, and many Devadasis were drawn into exploitative relationships, their sacred role reduced to one of survival. The sacred and the sensual blurred, leaving behind both beauty and tragedy. Across Southeast Asia, traditions varied further. In royal courts, women sometimes served as companions to kings, blending politics with intimacy. In other places, sex work was tied to trade, flourishing in port cities where sailors and merchants arrived from distant shores. Each culture shaped prostitution in its own way, sometimes ritualized, sometimes stigmatized, sometimes celebrated as art. What unites these Asian traditions is their complexity. Unlike the bland brothel economies of medieval Europe, here the roles often expanded beyond sex alone. The geisha with her shamisen, the Chinese courtesan with her poetry, the Devadasi with her sacred dance, all reveal a truth that companionship, conversation, and performance were as valuable as physical intimacy. These women were keepers of culture as much as survivors of circumstance. Imagine, once more, that snowy Kyoto street. The shamisen still plays. The lanterns glow. And a geisha pours warm sake into your cup. She leans forward, telling a story. Her laughter as carefully measured as the notes of her song. In this moment, you feel not only desire, but also beauty, refinement, and a brush with something timeless. This is the story of Asian prostitution. Not merely a tale of survival, but of artistry, devotion, and the blurred lines between the sacred, the sensual, and the enduring human need for connection. The city hums with new energy. Smoke pours from the tall chimneys of factories, and the air tastes of coal and iron. It is the 19th century, the height of the Industrial Revolution, and the streets of London, Manchester, and Birmingham are alive with the noise of progress. Horses clattering, trains whistling, factories grinding, late into the night. But beneath the roar of machines lies another rhythm, softer, but no less powerful. The whispers of desire, the footsteps leading to the shadowed alleys, the secret knock on a door. This is the Victorian Age, a time of strict morality in public, but restless hunger in private. Imagine yourself walking down Whitechapel Road in London after dusk. The lamps flicker dimly, casting long shadows on wet cobblestones. Women wait at the corners, their shawls pulled tightly around them against the chill, their eyes scanning for potential customers. Their faces show weariness, but also determination. For many, prostitution is the only means of survival in a world where factories pay little. Opportunities for women are scarce, and hunger is a constant threat. Victorian society condemned these women, labeling them fallen and unworthy of respect. Sermons warned of eternal damnation. Newspapers described them as dangers to public health and morality, and novels painted them as tragic figures to be pitied or despised. Yet at the same time, the demand for their services grew. Soldiers, sailors, factory workers, and even gentlemen of wealth sought their company. Behind the polished doors of drawing rooms, men lectured about virtue while secretly visiting brothels in the poorest quarters of the city. This was the paradox of the Victorian age: outward prudishness and inward indulgence. Respectability was everything. A family's honor depended on appearances, and so desire was pushed underground. Prostitution, though despised, was tolerated as a necessary evil, a way to protect innocent women by providing men with an outlet for their passions. The hypocrisy was tiring. Society shamed the women, but shielded the men, punishing one side of the exchange while excusing the other. Brothels flourished, some hidden in cramped alleyways, others disguised as houses for entertainment. In London alone, thousands of prostitutes worked the streets, from the ragged streetwalker who charged a few pennies to the high-class courtesan who entertained politicians and aristocrats in luxurious apartments. The spectrum of sex work was vast, but the stigma was shared. The dangers were equally vast. Disease, particularly syphilis, spread rapidly, prompting Parliament to pass the Contagious Diseases Acts in the mid-1800s. These laws required suspected prostitutes in certain garrison towns to undergo invasive medical examinations. Refusal could lead to imprisonment. The acts were justified as protecting public health, but in practice, they punished women while leaving male clients untouched. Outrage grew. The reformers, like Josephine Butler, led campaigns to repeal the laws, arguing that they violated women's dignity and reinforced double standards. In the foggy streets, danger also came from violence. Jack the Ripper's murders in 1888 cast chilling spotlight on the lives of poor prostitutes in Whitechapel. Newspapers sensationalized the killings, painted lurid portraits of both the victims and the killer. Yet even in death, the women were judged harshly, remembered more for their occupation than for their humanity. These stories revealed the vulnerability of those who lived at the margins of Victorian society, unprotected by law or compassion. And yet, in the darkness, there were glimmers of resilience. Some women carved out independence, using their earnings to support families, escape abusive marriages, or create small businesses. Others found companionship in broader communities, sharing food, shelter, and a fragile kind of sisterhood. Even in the most precarious lives, there was agency, strength, and survival. Step now into a more elegant drawing room, far from Whitechapel. Here, a courtesan reclines on a velvet sofa, her gown shimmering in the lamplight. She converses with a gentleman about literature, art, and politics. For her, sex is only part of the transaction. Wit, charm, and intellect are equally valuable. These courtesans could build influence, shaping the reputations of powerful men, inspiring artists, and living lives of gloom, though always shadowed by the risk of disgrace. The Victorian age was a world of contrasts. Soot-stained factories beside glittering theaters, sermons on purity beside secret indulgence, condemnation beside dependency. Prostitution was everywhere, yet never spoken of in polite society. It was hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of the age. As you close your eyes, imagine once more the streets of Victorian London. The gaslights flicker, the fog swirls, and the sound of carriage wheels fades into the distance. A woman waits in the shadows, her fate tied to the contradictions of her time. She is scorned and needed, invisible and everywhere. Her story is not only hers, but the story of an age that built its image of virtue, of a foundation of silence and hypocrisy. The clang of machinery echoes in your ears, and the smell of smoke lingers in the air. Imagine yourself standing in a bustling industrial city at the height of the 19th century. The streets are alive with the shuffle of workers leaving factories after long shifts. Their hands are blistered, their clothes covered in soot, their bodies worn from 14 hours of labor. Amid this chaos, you are not a factory worker, but a woman searching for survival. Work for women is scarce. Perhaps a same-stress wage or service as a maid, but both pay barely enough for bread. And so, like thousands of others, you find yourself drawn to the street corner, where the possibility of coins in a stranger's hand offers a way to keep hunger at bay. The industrial age was an era of progress and invention, but also of extreme inequality. Cities grew rapidly, swelling with migrants from the countryside seeking factory jobs. Overcrowding became severe, with entire families crammed into one-room tenements. Disease spread quickly. Poverty was everywhere. In this harsh environment, prostitution thrived as both a survival strategy and an escape from unbearable working conditions. For many women, it was not a permanent choice, but a temporary refuge, an alternative when wages failed or illness struck. Widows, abandoned wives, and young girls from the countryside all found themselves at risk. Children as young as 12 or 13 sometimes entered prostitution, not out of desire, but out of desperation. The Industrial Revolution may have promised advancement for society, but for women on the margins, It often meant exploitation. Governments began to notice. Fear of disease and social unrest led to new laws and regulations. In Britain, the Contagious Diseases Acts sought to regulate prostitutes near military bases, subjecting them to compulsory medical examinations. In France, the system of maisons closes. Regulated brothels was expanded, where women were registered, monitored, and confined. Prostitution became not only a personal tragedy for many women, but a matter of state control. Reformers, too, raised their voices. Religious groups and social activists campaigned to rescue women from vice, establishing shelters and workhouses. Writers like William Apthorp studied prostitution with a mix of scientific curiosity and moral concern, while campaigners like Josephine Butler denounced the cruelty of forced examinations. Their efforts exposed the double standards of the time. Men's desires were overlooked, while women's bodies were policed. Yet prostitution persisted. It was too deeply tied to the conditions of industrial society: low wages, gender inequality, and rapid urban growth. The streets hum with energy, yet in shadowed alleys and behind closed doors, another economy thrives. It is an economy built on desperation, sustained by demand, and regulated by states that both condemned and relied upon it. The industrial age did not invent prostitution, but it transformed it. No longer just a transaction in back alleys or taverns, it became a system woven into the machinery of modern cities, monitored, debated, legislated, and resisted. It reflected both the progress and the failures of an age that prided itself on advancement, yet left so many behind. As the snow clears and the factories fall silent at night, the city does not rest. Somewhere, a door closes softly, a coin changes hands, and another chapter in the long story of survival is written. Close your eyes and step into a world at war. The year is 1915. You are in a makeshift camp somewhere in France. The smell of mud and gunpowder thick in the air. Rows of tents, stench into the distance, filled with weary soldiers who have seen too much in too little time. Amid the caves of war, the presence of women, sometimes nurses, sometimes entertainers, and sometimes prostitutes, is impossible to ignore. You are one of them. For you, the battlefield is not only a place of violence, but also of survival, where companionship and intimacy are traded for coins, rations, or protection. The 20th century reshaped prostitution in profound ways, largely because of the two world wars. Armies moved across continents, and wherever soldiers went, the demand for sex followed. Brothels near military camps became common, sometimes regulated by armies themselves to control venereal disease. In France, official military brothels, called maisons tolérées, were established In Japan, the government organized comfort stations where thousands of women, many forced from occupied territories, were made to serve soldiers. These stories reveal not only the persistence of prostitution, but also its darker chapters, where exploitation was institutionalized in the name of moral and discipline. Beyond the battlefield, cities during wartime were transformed. Women displaced by bombings, poverty, or the absence of male providers often turned to sex work as a means of survival. Yet, paradoxically, wars also opened new opportunities. Women entered factories, offices, and fields in numbers never seen before, proving their abilities outside the home. This shift began to change how society viewed women's roles, and with it, how it viewed sex work. After the wars, morality shifted. The Roaring Twenties brought a sense of liberation. Jazz clubs, speakeasies, the flapper culture celebrated a freer, bolder expression of sexuality. Prostitution still carried stigma, but it was increasingly entwined with nightlife and entertainment. In cities like New York, Paris, and Berlin, sex workers mingle with artists, musicians, and writers, becoming part of vibrant, underground scenes. But this openness was uneven. In conservative societies, prostitution remained harshly condemned. Governments experimented with different approaches. Some criminalized it entirely. Others tolerated and regulated it. In America, the Mann Act of 1910 targeted the trafficking of women, though it was often used to police interracial relationships as much as actual exploitation. The mid-century brought yet another shift. The 1960s sexual revolution questioned old taboos and celebrated personal freedom. Feminist voices, however, were divided. Some argued prostitution was exploitation rooted in patriarchy, while others defended it as a legitimate form of labor, deserving rights and protection. This debate would shape policies and perceptions for decades to come. Imagine yourself now in post-war Paris or swinging London. The streets are alive with new lights. Music spills from cafes, and the mood is one of restless experimentation. The old prudishness of the Victorian age has faded, replaced by a world grappling with wateranti, freedom, and contradiction. Yet in back alleys and brothels, the ancient story continues. Women and men negotiating survival, desire, and stigma in an ever-changing world. The 20th century, with its wars and revolutions, did not erase prostitution. Instead, it transformed its stage, bringing it from the shadows of industrial poverty into the spotlight of cultural change. From survival in wartime camps to defiance in the age of liberation, prostitution reflected the tensions of a century defined by upheaval. The glow of a screen lights up your room. Instead of gas lamps or neon signs, the 21st century's red light district lives online. Imagine yourself now, not on a crowded street corner, but behind a computer screen or with a phone in hand. The city no longer sets the stage. The internet does. With a click, messages appear, photos are shared, and transactions arranged. Prostitution has entered a new age, the digital age. The internet has radically transformed sex work. Where once people had to walk dangerous streets or rely on exploitative brothels, today, many sex workers operate online. Websites, apps, and social media platforms allow workers to connect directly with clients, set boundaries, and in many cases, work with greater autonomy. Escort directories, subscription-based services like OnlyFans, and video call platforms have reshaped the landscape. The work has shifted from alleyways to digital spaces, safer in some respects, riskier in others. The digital age also created unprecedented visibility. Online communities allow sex workers to share safety tips, advocate for rights, and organize politically. In many countries, activists fight for the decriminalization of sex work, framing it as labor deserving protections rather than stigma. This movement challenges centuries of moral judgment, asking societies to reconsider prostitution not as a vice, but as a profession. Yet new challenges have emerged. Laws like FOSTA SESTA in the United States, designed to combat trafficking, have also forced sex workers off safer online platforms, pushing some backward toward more dangerous in-person encounters. Technology offers freedom, but also surveillance. Digital trails can expose workers to harassment, blackmail, or police action. Culturally, the internet blurs lines between sex work and mainstream life. Platforms like OnlyFans attract not only professional sex workers, but also everyday people seeking income. The stigma, while still strong, is increasingly questioned by a generation growing up in a more open digital culture. Conversations about consent, agency, and exploitation are more nuanced than in the past. At the same time, darker truths remain. Human trafficking persists, sometimes facilitated by the very technologies that offer freedom to others. In parts of the world, poverty and coercion continue to drive people into sex work with little choice. The digital age has not erased old inequalities. It has simply reshaped them. Imagine yourself now as a digital age worker. Your brothel is a laptop. Your street corner, a profile page. The sound of coins is replaced with a ping of online payments. You curate your identity, negotiate boundaries, and manage your audience. For some, it is empowering, a chance to earn without intermediaries. For others, it is isolating, precarious, and exhausting. The modern era of prostitution is complex. Part liberation, part exploitation, part visibility, part invisibility. It exists in a world that debates whether to criminalize, legalize, or decriminalize it. And as technology continues to evolve, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, even the rise of sex robots, the story of sex work is still being written. As you drift towards sleep, consider this. Prostitution has survived every inch of human history, from ancient temples to industrial alleys, from wartime camps to digital screens. It has adapted, endured, and transformed. In the digital glow of our modern world, it continues, hidden in plain sight, yet closer to the center of society's debates than ever before. The world has changed, but some struggles remain. Picture yourself in a modern city, perhaps New York, London, Manila, or Tokyo. The streets are brighter with new lights. Cars hum through the avenues, and the chatter of cafes and bars fills the air. Behind these lights, however, the age-old story of prostitution continues. Only now, it exists within a framework of debate, law, and shifting cultural norms. You are part of this world, standing at the intersection of tradition, morality, and modernity. In the 20th and 21st centuries, prostitution has increasingly become a topic of public discussion. No longer universally condemned in harsh tones, it is debated openly in academic studies, legislative chambers, and media outlets. Activists and scholars argue over whether it should be criminalized, legalized, or decriminalized. Some frame this labor, work like any other, deserving protections, fair wages, and safe conditions. Others emphasize the risks of exploitation, human trafficking, and societal harm. The stigma of the past has not disappeared, but it has evolved. Sex work is still morally contested in many cultures, yet modern advocacy highlights the rights of workers. Movements, such as the Global Sex Workers' Rights Campaign, argue that legal protections and labor recognition are the key to reducing harm, rather than moral condemnation. These debates are not abstract. They affect the lives of millions of women, men, and non-binary people worldwide. Technology amplifies both opportunities and challenges. Online platforms allow for autonomy and safer interactions with clients. Yet legal crackdowns, censorship, and surveillance threaten these spaces. The very tools that empower can also endanger, reflecting a complex interplay of freedom, risk, and regulation. Meanwhile, social media shapes public perception, blurring lines between advocacy, entertainment, and stigma. Globally, different approaches reveal the spectrum of modern regulation. Some countries, like New Zealand and parts of Australia, have decriminalized sex work, emphasizing worker safety. Others, like Sweden and Norway, follow the Nordic model, criminalizing clients rather than workers to reduce demand. Many nations continue to criminalize both parties, often driving the industry underground and increasing danger for workers. The patchwork of policies reflects ongoing uncertainty about the best way to balance morality, safety, and human rights. Cultural attitudes are also shifting. The rise of feminism and broader conversations about gender, consent, and economic inequality have reframed discussions about prostitution. Some feminists emphasize empowerment and agency, advocating for reclamation of sex work as legitimate labor. Others focus on structural inequality and coercion, highlighting how poverty, discrimination, and limited opportunities can push people into the industry against their will. Both perspectives influence public debate, policy, and social understanding. Imagine, then, the streets, apartments, and digital spaces where modern sex work occurs. The people you see are diverse. Some work by choice, others by necessity. Some flourish within legal frameworks, while others navigate hidden, precarious economies. The same forces, desire, survival, and social judgment that shaped prostitution in ancient times remain, but they now interact with technology, law, and culture in new ways. As you drift towards sleep, consider this. From sacred temple dancers to Renaissance courtesans, Victorian streetwalkers to digital age workers, prostitution has endured because it meets human needs, material, emotional, and intimate. The modern era does not erase its history. It adds layers of complexity, choice, and debate. Prostitution today exists at the intersection of morality and pragmatism, law and freedom, stigma and agency. A story still being written every day, in every city, and online around the world. And so, as the centuries pass before your eyes, you return to the quiet of your own room. The fire crackles. The city beyond your window sleeps. The story of prostitution is not just about sin or desire, but about human resilience, survival, and the choices made in the shadows of history. As your eyelids grow heavy, let this long tale settle softly, like footsteps fading down an ancient road. For even in the quietest moments, the voices of the past whisper gently, reminding us of the enduring human spirit.